But maybe I don't know. I'm sort of spitballing there. But the former point as well about the academy setup, I think I would agree that they haven't really been executed perfectly. And my sense is, and please sense check me on this, my sense is that there isn't really, in comparison to sport, where there's very defined sort of levels of participation, so recreation to performance and developmental in the middle there. I feel like in esports, we've sort of bypassed developmental completely. And as soon as you step out of recreational, everything's performance. And so having an academy, it's like you're selling an academy spot on the basis that it's a springboard to the next level. So if you have a shot where you have an academy and you bring up a player for a game or for just a training experience, that player is then maybe a bit disgruntled about going back to the academy level. And I think that's very difficult because equally, if a player is a sub, they're missing out on a split where their stats appear on OPGG or LoL Pros or something like that, and it's career kind of a career backstep to be a sub because you're not seen, and that's I think that can also be part of the pressure. So I don't know. Is there a development?
I think that the way that academy teams have been run in the past, and as far as I can tell, continue to be run, is one of the sort of biggest mistakes that we've made in Europe for those exact reasons. I think that almost no team has a clear goal of what they're trying to do. And we're seeing exceptions of that in certain places, and those exceptions being absolutely massive. Mad Lions in the LEC this year, or KC have done this a lot, of just having like a really clear, this is what we're going to try to do. Now, if you take KC as an example, the what they're trying to do is win everything, and what they have been doing, with extras, and they've done that really, really well. But we don't see teams who are, and I would actually say, adult enough to recognize, look, if we're not going to commit this amount of resources, then our goal can't be to win. So what actually is our goal? And that comes from a performance point of view, where there are teams who their goal should be to make playoffs, but they have their goal as to make worlds, and therefore they miss out on playoffs. Or their goal should be to make worlds, and they are instead playing like they're trying to win, and therefore they miss out on worlds. I won't say the examples I've got in my head, but as a coach coming into the split, and maybe this isn't the role of the coach, but maybe it's the person one above the coach, head of LOL or anything like that. If previously in the LEC we've come like, I don't know, we've come to groups, or we've even missed out on groups, the goal for the next split is not to try and win. So don't try and beat G2. You have to target the games. You say, okay, right, we need 3 games, or we need 4 games to get through to the next round. So which 4 games are we going to put the effort into winning? Maybe you don't tell your players this, but you still see everyone preparing to beat G2 because it's great to beat the best. And that's fine if you're a volunteer, but like, we need to kind of grow up about things. So even from a performance point of view, I would say there's hardly any sort of adult and serious goals. But definitely from an organizational point of view, you see that a lot. And it was the same with kind of basically every academy. I mean, there was a few academies, like even actually Astralis Academy, for example, who focused on trying to find players even from their region and put together rosters of players who had potential. But a lot of teams are run with just, we're going to do the best that we possibly can with the money we decide to spend this year. And then next year we'll start again. And eventually, like, there's a phrase that actually that my dad talked about when we're looking at CVs. You have to be very careful with someone who's got 10 years of experience. Is it 10 years of experience, or is it 1 year 10 times?
Yeah, right.
And a lot of VRL teams have been here for 10 years, but they've been here for they do 1 year 10 times in a row, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And we don't see anyone, I think, really trying to develop talent. And you would have thought academies are absolutely great for that, and yet we saw academy teams, again, I won't use names, but they don't have academies anymore, which is very telling. But taking players who had played on their main roster, just because it's like, well, these were the best roster that we could put together to do as well as we can in our competition. And it's like, you've seen that over 2 years, this player in your environment hasn't got the level to step up to the next, to be in the LEC. So why do we have him in our academy?
Yeah.
Unless he's there to develop everyone else, which he was not. So if your academy is 4 out of 5 ex-LEC players, several of whom have played in your main team, then it just shows me like it's not about that. But the problem is, and we're going on a bit of a rant, but the problem is that it can't be, in a way, because if you're the coach of that team, you're not judged on how many players you get promoted. You're judged on how well you do. And basically all players and all coaches who get promoted are people who are like top 4 EU Masters. So isn't actually the best thing to do to just focus on performance. And then the last point, which I was actually talking to Rhea, the coach of, well, was the head coach of KC, now the assistant coach. And he made the really good point, is that it's also dependent on your region whether you can even do this. Because, for example, the LFL is like, it's obviously not got the same level as the LEC, but in terms of competitiveness of a 10-man league, I'm not sure you could get like mathematically more competitive. There was points where we were there where we were 8th and we were 2 games away from being 3rd and getting guaranteed EU Masters. So if you actually are focusing on development, you have a massive risk of getting demoted as an academy team in a league like that. And maybe it's just much easier if you happen to be a team from somewhere in the north and you can play in the NLC, where I feel like you can do both. But the whole system maybe isn't, I don't know if it's the whole system isn't set up for it, or just we've misexecuted on the potential. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned to me before that there are teams like basketball teams, for example, or they have university teams. So they've got this feeder system, but they're university teams who focus on winning, and they're university teams who focus on getting the most players in the NBA.
Yeah, I think I sympathise with all sides of the argument. That's kind of the chaos of it all, because it's not intuitive to be in a league and to set a goal that's not demolishing everyone and finishing first, right? It's not intuitive from a business perspective. Like, why do we not want to maximize our exposure by being the best? Like the business model, like it's not intuitive in terms of the high performance model. So we want to win, we want to prove ourselves, we want to show that our systems are better than their systems, our talent is better than their talent. And it's a problem across the board. Esports an elite sport. I think this emphasis on first place and the trophy, when there's a nice caveat to a definition of high performance in academic writing, where actually it doesn't really matter if you can be high performance by virtue of competing in an elite league. It doesn't mean that you are high performing. So not high performance, high performing. And that would be, high performing is a team that is doing well relative to their resources. So, if you've got all the money in the world and you're finishing second in the top league in the world, are you really high performance? Like, you had every opportunity to do everything the best way possible and finish above that. Likewise, if you're a team that is sort of penciled in as being automatic relegation team and you finish mid-table, you're arguably just performing above your means, right? And that's so worthy of credit and accolades, that it takes a big philosophical shift in how you see the why we compete to really appreciate that. And I think there are clever things we could do better in esports. For example, like being together as a team is one way to sort of get sponsors and exposure and support the marketing campaign. But also, if you do develop players, that's a story to tell. And I think esports thrives on stories. And if you have a really good academy setup, should promote the team and their success. But I think there is a nice story to tell in, we discovered this player, we developed this player has thrived in our team. All right, we didn't get the wins, but individually doing very well. We can highlight other situations, interpersonal situations where they've thrived. We have nice game cons from this player. We can promote this individual success as well. But it kind of comes back to this the coach has some role there, like you say, managing upwards. I forgive every org owner for saying, I don't want the coach that comes to me and says, look, we're not going to win. Like the expectation is to do well, but to develop talent. I forgive every org owner for saying, okay, I don't want you on my to manage my roster. However, it would be just probably a refreshing shift to have some teams say, look, we're gunning to be a stable team here and to develop our identity, develop our playing identity, our org identity, to adhere to certain values, to give our players the best sense of care and well-being, to create the best stories and develop a fan base. Like I think there's real merit in all of that, which I understand. It sounds like an expression of from the get-go if you start with that. Very tough.
Yeah, I think it has to come from, I mean, this is maybe a different point, but I think there's really a space for people in between the very top and the coaches who have an understanding of both, and it has to, I think, come from there. Whether that's, it would be a GM, I guess, in American sport. We have general managers in esports, but it's so team to team what they do. It's very, very unique roles, so I don't think you can say it should be on that person, but to someone to come in and have a clear vision and like long-term strategy or strategical thinking is just completely does not exist
Right.
in esports. I think one of the things that really always sticks out to me, I can't actually remember who said it. There's the High Performance podcast, which I'd highly recommend to everybody who's listening to this. You'll see a lot of inspiration, I'll say, with this one compared to that. But they open with the question, what is high performance? And I can't remember who it was. It might have been Phil Neville or someone. So maybe I'll try and find this and post it somewhere else. But when he was asked, what is high performance? He said, it's doing the best we can with what we've got where we are. That's
Bingo.
it. And now the problem is that everyone else that comes on this show, I'm like, well, he's already answered it.
It's wrong.
We've got the correct answer. Thank you.
But that is so nice. What a nice sentiment, because it means that even if you're competing in the lowest league on the planet, you can still be high performing, because maybe you only get opportunity to train twice a week, but you're smashing it in that official. That's great. You're high performing in some sense.
Yeah.
So,
or even if you're not competing, like you're just doing the best.
Yes.
In your job or in your role or even in your life with what you've got right now. That's such a good goal to be just aiming at and having there. It's also, just endlessly progressing. So I think it's a really, really good sentiment. I think one of the things that I've seen people say that we should do in esports is be a bit more open about salaries and having kind of public salaries. And I mean, I know there's reasons to not do this, but it would really tap onto one of the things that you said before, where, knowing some of the detail behind the scenes, I'm much more impressed with certain performances than maybe fans are. And it's like, look, if you're spending 5th out of 10 in the LEC and yet you've got the second most titles, that is amazing work. And if you're spending the most and you've not won, doesn't matter if you've come sort of 3rd or something. That's really not what you're aiming for. Not that it's necessarily terrible, because of course, with all this stuff, with all these goals, what happens on the day, it's why we love sport. But just because you're spending the most doesn't mean you're winning the most. But maybe you could almost kind of have clarity.
Yeah, you could imagine like an alternative league table with those metrics, and I could imagine like a huge fan base just following that league table. And of course, we like the winner of the winner outright gets their support isn't going anywhere. Like people love to see the champions doing the best, but like that alternate relative to your salary, that would get a huge following.
Yeah, and also you would get to see what people are working with, and we'd have a much better judge of how good people are doing, or how maybe some people are struggling when it seems like from the outside they're doing really well. I mean, one of the things that was one of my favorite coaches is Dave Brailsford, who worked with British Cycling. And as he came in, there was also a huge injection of money from the National Lottery. And then when he came into like road race cycling with Sky, they also had the biggest budget, and that quite often was levied as the kind of knock on him and what he was doing was like, well, you just have the biggest budget, so obviously you're going to win. And it's like they won something like 5 out of 6 Tour de France's in a row with 3 different riders, when they were always having other people go somewhere else and become the best rider there. It's like that does not happen. It doesn't matter if you've got the biggest budget, like that just doesn't happen. And so seeing these teams who are like, okay, we can actually maybe use the budgets that they're spending to have a bit of the kind of Formula One thing, where it's like there's a race for the middle, there's a race for the near the bottom, and there's a race at the top, because we shouldn't be considering this team with this team because it's like 5 times the budget, or one player is paid more than the entire organization of a different team.
Yeah. We would have loved to see Haas get somewhere, right? That would have been nice. But yeah, I think that having a constructors championship like would be quite cool. Yeah.